On this episode of War Docs, we speak with family physician and former Navy doc, Donnelly Wilkes. Donnelly talks about his experiences deploying to a violent combat zone and medically supporting Marines fighting in the Battle of Fallujah. He describes his preparation for and emotions providing combat casualty care at the tip of the spear. Dr. Wilkes describes his inspiration for writing his memoir called Code Red Fallujah and what he hopes readers will take away from his insights and lessons learned. Find out more about Dr. Wilkes and our previous guests on our website, wardocspodcast.com. And make sure you follow War Docs on your preferred podcast platform and subscribe to War Docs on our YouTube channel. I'm your host, Dr. Doug Soderdahl, retired Army urologist. Thanks for pressing play.
Welcome to War Docs, the military medicine podcast. This show brings you a first-hand, behind-the-scenes look into the mission, unique opportunities, and deployed experiences of the entire military healthcare team. From state-of-the-art hospitals in the United States to the most austere environments across the globe, War Docs has you covered.
Today we're privileged to welcome family physician and former Navy doc, Donnelly Wilkes, to War Docs. Donnelly, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
So let's start off with what led you to pursue a career in Navy medicine. And I know that you decided to do that before 9/11. How did 9/11 impact your career decisions and then later trajectory?
Well, like many, 9/11 came at an unexpected time in my life and changed my career path forever. I was a fourth year in medical school at Tulane Medical School, New Orleans. I had already accepted a Navy scholarship for medical school, and that happens before you start medical school. So the scholarship was granted, I accepted it, and they paid for school. In turn, I owed them 7 years of active duty service. And at that time, the brochure was, you'll probably float around on a Westpac tour and hop around some islands practicing Navy medicine here and there as part of your active duty service. And as we all know, that changed many people's lives, including mine. So to answer your question, how did it impact my trajectory? The answer would be in every way possible. And we'll get into that as we go on.
So you went ahead knowing that most likely you weren't going to just float around in the Pacific. When you're doing your internship, you're preparing to become a battalion physician. What kind of training do you get for that? And knowing that you're going to be deployed just out of internship as basically a general medical officer?
Most people don't know that physicians in military residencies have potentially a very different pathway than most civilian physicians. So briefly, all civilian physicians, to practice medicine independently, they have to complete their residency. It's usually a minimum of 3 years, many times 4 and longer. Military physicians can be pulled from residency after just 1 year of training. That rule has since changed to require all military physicians to complete residency. But at that time, during combat operations, the needs of the Navy or needs of the military, interns, after they complete that year, can be plucked and sent to active duty. That's what happened to me. In that time, there was a choice, so to speak, that you could choose to be a general medical officer on the ground or go green side with the Marines, or blue side, which in most cases you go to a naval base and end up on a ship. I chose to go green side, various reasons. I was engaged at the time and wanted my future wife to stay close to me. I also just loved what the Marines stood for, what they did. They're the tip of the spear. That's where the action was. And so for better or for worse, I chose to go with the Marines, and in short order found myself in Fallujah.
So knowing that you're going to be deployed basically to the tip of the spear, how do you prepare mentally for deploying to a violent combat zone? And did you feel like you were medically ready or mentally ready?
Thought a lot about that over the years. And going back to one of your previous questions I didn't answer regarding the training. So one, the pathways is different for military physicians, and the training, of course, is different. And so some of the things that are provided to prepare you start during medical school, 1 month out of each year. I'm taken out of my normal training from Tulane and started understanding what it's like to be a naval officer. Went to officer training school in Newport, Rhode Island. Would go do spend some time at various military bases. And then after medical school, that's when some of the field medical training started. So they'd send you to field medical school. That was at Camp Pendleton, where my duty station was. They sent me out to Texas to go through what's called combat casualty care course. That was a pretty great 5-day evolution where you're in the field. They keep you up throughout the night. There's a mock war with sounds of grenades and incoming rockets, moulage wounded men or women that need care that you have to medevac, that whole kind of thing for 3 days. And they really kind of make you feel what it's like to be in the field. And then after that, the training during residency, once I was tasked to a Marine Corps battalion, even got better. And that would include mock raids with the Marines out on Camp Pendleton at night on a target with the medical assets in tow, mirroring what it might be to be involved in real combat operations. That was really thrilling and exciting to be a part of, and was preparing me mentally to understand what it would be like to be with an infantry battalion anywhere in the world. And then finally, the last piece of training that was really high level was I spent a month at USC County Hospital in Los Angeles with the trauma team, elevating my skills in field surgical procedures like surgical airways, cricothyroidotomies, chest tubes, things like that. So that's some of the training. And then just to touch on that question about preparing mentally as a physician and going through residency and things like that, that's part of, I think, the process is you are preparing yourself to encounter complex situations, to work long hours, to make decisions at crucial moments. And that's part of medical school, and that's part of training and becoming a physician. The field combat part, providing field medicine, uh, the skills are taught, and we definitely had a high level of training. But in the end, after going through it, nothing can fully prepare you for the intensity of a real combat environment. And that's no fault of anyone. It's just like, I imagine it's just like a woman giving birth. Nothing can fully prepare you for it until you actually experience it yourself.
So you mentioned that you were sent to Fallujah to support the Marines. Can you share a specific moment from that time in Fallujah that stayed with you the most?
Well, I'll describe one day that I've used the analogy when I've been asked what it was like to provide medical care in the field. And just for your listeners to set the scene, our forward operating base was a mile or two from the outskirts of Fallujah. The Battle of Fallujah, the first Battle of Fallujah, commenced April 4th, 2004. Our Marine Corps battalion, which is roughly 1,000 men, was at our forward base and then dispersed in and around the Al Anbar province. When General Mattis came to our base and gave us marching orders 24 hours prior to the invasion, we mobilized most of the battalion and the next morning pushed out to to surround Fallujah. My field medical aid station was at a position called the Cloverleaf, which was a strategically important highway intersection just a few hundred yards from the edge of the city. And that's where our medical assets were positioned. We took cans, metal cans of our equipment, medical equipment. We set up kind of in the dirt off the side of the road underneath a freeway overpass. That was a hard structure. We had some dirt, what we called HESCO barriers set up around us, and then a little platoon of Marines and Navy corpsmen with me. So we were fairly exposed, but it was a great position to receive injured Marines directly from the front lines of Fallujah. So from there, we could see the battle playing out. Tanks came through, Apache attack helicopters flying overhead, amphibious assault vehicles coming through, and it was just the Wild West. But that's where we were positioned to receive casualties. And then with all that said, I'll go back to answering about one of the hardest days. So we had been there for maybe 48 hours. The fighting was getting more intense each day. This day was just a particularly bullish day. A number of injured Marines had come through. I think it was about midday. A Humvee comes screaming in. Sometimes we get radio contact that they're bringing in wounded men, sometimes not. And this Humvee, I can just tell from the way they approach that they've got injured Marines in the back, and they pull up. 4 Marines carry a fairly lifeless body from the back of the vehicle, and it is one of their lieutenants. I use different names in the book. So um, this lieutenant had been shot in the head, and he was dead on arrival, killed in action. And it was the first Marine killed in action that we had to kind of pronounce dead on scene. And his Marines were around, Navy corpsmen are around, and it was just a particularly solemn, defeating moment for everyone amidst all, the chaos of the last 48 hours. And there's just this moment where I didn't know what to do, I didn't know what to say, and then it just kind of hit me. Well, we got to pray around this man. So I gathered everybody up, and we all knelt down, arms around each other. I said a short prayer, mainly praying for strength and healing and just the ability to go on in the fight for our brother here. And then we all just kind of knelt back like a tired losing air, being deflated. We knelt back, and there was just a moment of silence, and it was a hard moment, but it was also a beautiful moment. And then I said, okay, let's get ready for the next. And that short time, although sad and somber, was rejuvenating, just because we were able to put our arms around each other and know that we didn't fully understand this devastating loss at the time, but we were ready to go on. And so it was tough, but also a beautiful moment. And that was actually captured. We didn't know there was a photographer that had been just dropped off at our position by one of their convoys, and they snapped a photo, and it ended up circulating in a lot of magazines, including Time and things like that. And I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, and not I think it did win a Pulitzer Prize, and so that's why I featured that particular photo in my book.
So your training includes just medical school, and you finished an internship, and now you're at basically a role 1 level unit close to the fighting action. What was your most difficult combat injury that you had to deal with in your experience there in Fallujah?
The most difficult injury was a Marine that arrived at the Cloverleaf with a massive head wound. It was a gunshot wound. And just to my shock, he was alive and breathing, not very well, but he was breathing on his own. And so we had litter stands, and we had field surgical airway kits, cricothyroidotomy kits. And so we got him set up. What I was describing earlier is, performing these procedures in a controlled environment is hard enough. In an emergency room, in a controlled setting where you have the lighting, the equipment, the staffing around you, doing it in the field is just a whole nother level. We had practiced chest tubes and airways on pigs, for example, when we were in Okinawa training. I was able to do a couple at USC, but doing it in the field was just a whole nother complex situation with the heat, the flak jacket on your chest. You're trying to, you're trying to take deep breaths. You can't because of the weight of the flak jacket. Your helmet's on. You've got equipment. There's often mortars and sometimes even rockets in the background, helicopters going overhead. And so the elements just make it so much more challenging. And then in some cases, before we had litter stands, we were working on the ground on these patients. So kind of bending over and trying to get good lighting and things like that. I'm setting all that up because to put a surgical airway in this Marine was very difficult. Sorry to be a little bit graphic, but he had an open head wound. He was bleeding somewhere from inside the head wound down into his throat. We couldn't suction it out quick enough. He was choking and kind of bucking. We couldn't necessarily sedate him because we didn't want to compromise his respirations. So anyways, and we didn't have the drugs to paralyze his vocal cords and things like that to intubate him. So that's how we ended up deciding to do a surgical airway. It was successful with the help of corpsmen, and we were able to stabilize his breathing. We got the tube down in the trachea, and we were able to provide artificial respirations long enough to get a Humvee in, medevac him to the surgical company, which was a few miles away at a bigger base. He made it into the operating room. Unfortunately, he died, but we were all very proud of our efforts and what we were able to do for that Marine to give him the best chance.
So you mentioned that where you were at, you didn't have surgical assets or the ability to do formal surgery. How did you get those patients that exceeded your capabilities who maybe needed surgery? How did you get them to that next level, that surgical unit? And how long would that take?
As soon as we knew we had a Marine that required a higher level of care, a Marine or Navy corpsman, there was about 50 corpsmen in our battalion, and a number of them were with the platoons in the fight right in Fallujah, and then some of the corpsmen were with me. And so as soon as we knew we had someone who needed something that exceeded our capabilities, we would radio for a ground medevac. We also had helos, but 9 times out of 10, it was a ground medevac. They would come with a pretty heavily armored convoy from the base, which was 2 to 3 miles from us, where they had high-level surgical capabilities. They'd be there within about 10 minutes and get that injured Marine or Navy corpsman on board and back to the surgeon.
So you mentioned that you've written a book about your experiences, and I actually had a chance to read it. I'll hold it up for our audience to see. So it was Code Red Fallujah. What inspired you to write that book?
During the evolution of the book, the bones of it I wrote on my second deployment. So Code Red Fallujah is about the events that I'm telling you now, the first Battle of Fallujah in 2004. And then I came back to the US, still stationed at Camp Pendleton. Within the next 2 to 3 years, I finished my time at Pendleton. I was transferred to Port Hueneme, and as soon as I got to that new duty station, the commanding officer said they needed me to go back to Iraq. So I joined a battalion out of Camp Lejeune back to Iraq. And that was just a rough time going back again. The combat was still pretty intense in some areas. I knew what I was in for. A lot of emotions were stirred. So I started writing during that deployment, and I wrote most of what's in Code Red Fallujah during that deployment. I was referencing my field journal that I had with me during the Battle of Fallujah. And I used that to just kind of take myself back there to write some of my thoughts and feelings down during that second deployment. That really helped me pass the time of that deployment. So it was therapeutic for me. And then I came home and I put it down. And in the next couple of years, as time went on, I knew that the Battle of Fallujah was an important event in general because it was the biggest battle of the entire 10-year Iraq War. And so as time went on, I kind of understood that it was a large event from a military operations standpoint. Certainly for military medicine, I knew that it was important because I was able to come back and share some of my experiences and lessons learned and things like that with other physicians and give some presentations. And then for me personally, it was, it became this kind of defining moment in my life for a lot of different reasons. And so as time went on, to answer your question, it just became important to me to be able to put all these thoughts down on paper, tell the story, and then to be able to share it with others. And also, as I exited the military, and that's when I was close to getting the book published, you run into so many different people and you share experiences and stories, and you never know who you're going to run into on the street. It could be just anyone or in your life or in your professional career. And what they've done in their life can be really interesting. And you just don't know that until you talk to them and get to know them. So this was a way for me to allow others to get to know me.
You have to say, I really enjoyed reading it, and kind of going through some of your experiences brought back a lot of memories from me in my couple of deployments. And that's one of the things we like to do in War Docs is really kind of share the stories and hear from different people about their contributions, lessons learned, and insights. So appreciate you writing the book. One of the things that kind of struck me was that you were so close to the action that you've got mortars going off, you've got explosions. How do you cope with that constant danger and stress? And did you have any lasting effects from those concussive events?
Yes, I've gone back to those moments and thought about those elements of being there and providing care at that time and what I did or how I felt. How I would describe it in the moment is that it was surreal. It was scary for sure. Things that I never thought I would be exposed to were happening. It felt very much out of my control. I certainly did the or had the experience of um, asking God some serious questions, asking how did I just even end up here? I didn't, despite all of the the training and the signing up for the military and knowing what I could potentially get into, 9/11 changing everything, and within a year and a half ending up in one of the most violent places in the world, I just couldn't believe it was happening to me. And yet here I am with it's happening to everyone. And so you rely on the men next to you. I was in an all male battalion because that's how the Marine Corps infantry battalions are designed. So you have this camaraderie that I just can't describe. And you know that you're in it together. Doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter what you look like, you're in it together. You're truly, a band of brothers, and you feel that it helps you get through. It helped me get through. You're wearing the same uniform, whether I'm a doctor or an infantryman or corpsman, you look the same. And from a medical perspective, you just access that card, that training card. You learn to compartmentalize things and start at step one and solve that problem, and then move on to the next one and the next until you get to some kind of solution. And I think that's how I handled most of the most complex injuries and just the complexities of the day. I certainly relied on my faith. I certainly asked God some serious questions. Had some anger, at how I was an attendant to death and things like that. But in the end, there was no feeling sorry for myself. We were all in it together, and I just knew I needed to get through one day, and then the next day, and the next, until I earned the right to go home, just like every other man there.
What would you say was the most difficult medical decision that you had to make while you were deployed?
That's a tough one. I think it would be there was um, there was a Marine who was, I'm going to just say, mortally wounded. His head wound was so severe that it didn't make sense that he was still alive. In any normal setting, call it, probably comfort care measures would be provided. It was almost futile to, kind of try to go to these heroic measures to save this Marine, but it really took only seconds. And what I'm getting at is that in that moment, this is at the Cloverleaf, his Marines had just brought him in. He's clinging to life. I needed them to see that it doesn't matter if there's, 1 in a million chance of living, we're going to do everything we can. And so we proceeded with all out efforts to save this Marine. He died, but they saw that we're going to do everything every time for every one of them. And that was what was important in that moment.
So after your Navy experiences, deploying a couple times and getting out and joining the civilian world, how did those deployment experiences impact your medical practice in the civilian world? And how did they impact your role as a husband and father?
I think the greatest gains, and this certainly didn't happen in one moment or year, but over years, is that it helped me learn how to be still when I need to be still, to pause and appreciate the things around me, the people around me, my family, my wife, my kids, and my patients. And I think in the moments when you kind of can get, as a physician, sometimes tunnel vision, especially when you become more experienced and you know where you're headed with a diagnosis or a workup or things like that. So I think I learned to take those pauses, those moments, be still, listen better, and adjust my course, adjust my path, change my mind on a treatment plan or things like that, because I was able to listen or to see that patient a little more clearly. And that's helped me have a level of empathy that I probably had lost for a little while, because when I came back for the first couple of years, I certainly had a little, this I think lends to another question, how did I handle coming home? I certainly had some irritability and anger issues, a little bit of hypervigilance that I didn't expect, that's for sure. In fact, I was giving the medical briefs on the way home how to handle combat stress, not realizing I was going through some of it myself. Loud doors slamming, firecrackers going off would send me through the roof, that kind of things, nightmares for a couple of years. But as I went through that evolution and those emotions, in the aftermath, I came out better, stronger. Same with my wife, Katie, helped me through it, and all those things helped me become who I am today.
Were there any moments that you can remember that were you just like, man, this really gives me hope and resilience when you were there, because you saw a lot of negative stuff, but was there anything that you said, man, this keeps me going?
Number one, just being a part of the whole thing kept me going. Seeing all these men and women, rise to the challenge in really, really sometimes, horrible environments and situations, things like that. There was a particular Marine one night who filled me with hope. He had been through three close calls with death. One was a Humvee rollover where he came out unscathed. One was his Humvee was blown up by an IED. There was some serious injuries, and he escaped that. And I believe maybe the third was a gunshot wound. I had seen him at different intervals, and he came to me one night. We're walking home in the dark from the chow hall, I believe, and he was wrestling with these close calls with death and just kind of struggling emotionally getting through the deployment. And he asked me, I think he knew I was, Christian and relied on my faith in some of these moments. And so he was asking me some serious questions about what message God might be sending him. And really, he was asking if he thinks that, God was saying, hey, you're next, type thing. And I didn't quite know how to respond to him, but I just said, hey, listen, Private, I got to tell you something. If God didn't want you around, you wouldn't be talking to me right now. I think he's telling you he's not done with you yet. This is just, maybe call it a wake up call, or who knows, but he's grabbing your attention. And this isn't how it works, that, your close calls with death means you're next. It just simply means that you're supposed to be here right now telling me this story, and that you're asking some serious questions, and I don't have the exact answer, but I can tell you you're good to go, and we're going to get through this together. And it was just a great moment and filled me with a lot of hope for him, and he went on to do great on his deployment and come home in good shape. So that was a nice moment. We connected back at Camp Pendleton as well, and I don't know where he is today, but maybe I'll find him after this podcast.
Yeah, one of the things that, we've seen in the last decade or so is that the amount of kinetic action that, US troops have faced has been decreased. And so we don't see that op tempo like we did in 2004, 2005, even up to 2011 timeframe. But that could change in a minute, and we could find ourselves in another, big conflict with a lot of casualties. if you had the opportunity to give advice to medical professionals in military medicine now who are about to go into that similar environment that you and I have been in, what would you tell them?
Number one would certainly be talk to those who have had the opportunity to be there in these environments and provide real world, combat casualty care. So talk to those who've been there before you, not just the medical professionals, but of course the corpsmen and the experienced, senior leadership, because they're going to have lessons learned that are just invaluable. Some of the best preparation I had was grabbing some of the corpsmen and physicians who had some real world experience and just kind of picking their brains from a big kind of tactical view perspective. I would say this: when it came to um, a small to larger ground invasion, like I was part of, there was in the ops planning phase, which was happening in just the days before the invasion. There was a time when the senior leadership was talking about us being more mobile, going to the site of injuries, gunshot wounds, mortars, or mass casualties in, let's say, a Humvee or a convoy or something like that, going to the site, deploying corpsmen, kind of giving orders on the field and providing care there, and then evacuating. I argued against that, and I think it was a good choice because in the end, we chose to be stationary, concentrate our medical assets at the Cloverleaf, which was not far from the front lines. We allowed the corpsmen to do what they were trained to do right there on the spot in the field, provide that first level care, airway, breathing, circulation, get them to us as quickly as possible. And then because we had concentrated assets, myself and the other physician who was Lieutenant Cormac O'Connor, and then our corpsman, we were able to provide the next level of field care and then make the decision to medevac them, or if they were minor wounds, get them back in the fight. And I think that worked out really well, is my point, rather than having any type of mobile capabilities out there more exposed.
So you mentioned that when you initially went to medical school and were on an HPSB scholarship, you didn't really envision what your career trajectory would take you. We went to war and everything changed. So if a high school or a college student came to you today and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about joining military medicine in some capacity, whether they're a medic, corpsman, nurse, PT, doctor, whatever," what advice would you give them?
I would tell them as much as possible to try to understand what you're signing up for. And on a big picture scale, that would just be, if you could kind of rapidly go through the next 10 years of your life, understanding what a military career might look like in just a big overview snapshot. And the only way to understand that is to talk to those who have done it, because it is a big decision that you have to make years in advance, and it's a lifestyle. I knew that the military lifestyle would fit me. I certainly wasn't prepared for the intensity of the combat deployment, and so that's something I would definitely help them understand, not to scare them or anything like that, but just that the world is a wild place and things can change on a dime, just like it did for me. And that doesn't mean you're going to end up proximal to a major battle like I did, but you could. And so I would tell them it's a life of adventure, of moving and being prepared to move around. Needs of the Navy, needs of the military are going to kind of trump your ideas of where you want to head. It's a life filled with just great pride in what you do. I loved working with the people that I met every step of the way. I was proud to put on the uniform. I love that part of it, and the training was excellent. I think military medicine holds a candle next to any others as far as its quality. So I would do it all over again. I would tell whoever I'm talking to, I wouldn't change a thing, even despite where I ended up. And it's where I was supposed to be, is where I was meant to be. So as long as all that sounds good and doesn't make someone turn and run, then I would tell them to press on and go for it.
Well, we've been speaking with Dr. Donnelly Wilkes on War Docs podcast. Donnelly, thanks again for sharing your experiences and insights with us. And thank you for your service to the nation. And I really do encourage people to take advantage and take a look at your book. A lot of great stuff in it. And so just thank you for your service.
Thanks very much, Doug. I really enjoyed coming on. Thanks for doing this podcast and for being a patriot to our nation and our service members. Anyone who wants to read or see more about the book or pictures and things like that can go to coderedfallujah.com, and I'm happy to answer questions as well. You can email me.
Yeah, and we'll put all that information on our show notes, and so we can get people to your book and in contact with the information they need. So thanks again. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. You bet.
Thank you for listening to War Docs. We sure hope you enjoyed it. War Docs is a nonprofit organization supported by donations from listeners like you. Please follow and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you consume your podcasts, and rate and review this episode, and share the show with your contacts on social media. Find out more information about our show, our guests, and how to become a member of Team War Docs on wardocspodcast.com. Thank you for your support. If you like war stories and medical drama, War Docs has you covered. Spread the word.